Good morning and welcome to the final session of the 2025 Virtual Breakfast Series. I really appreciate everybody who's joined us this morning and throughout the series. My name is Steve Whittington. I am an MSU Extension field crops educator based out of the Montcalm County region. And in general, I cover the west central portion of the state for field crops production. All right, without further ado, we'll move into our last presenter of the Virtual Breakfast Series, Dr. Christy Sprague. Dr. Sprague is a professor and MSU Extension weed specialist, weed scientist. She does a lot of work around weeds and the effect on Michigan field crops. So she is here today to talk about some late season weed control concepts and some of the things that you can do to implement some sound weed control practices in your fields here this fall. So Christy, I'll go ahead and stop my share and you can go ahead and throw your slides up.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everybody. As Steve said, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can implement now as we're getting closer to harvest. And one of the things that's a good time of year to do is just kind of go around looking at your fields and seeing where you're seeing some weed escapes. I know this year there's have been some challenges with some of these different weed species, and I would say probably by far the most common weed that I'm seeing escaped in fields has been water hemp. And a lot of that has been due to the spread of water hemp throughout many counties and fields in the state, as well as just how this weed comes up quite a bit later in the season. So we had some fairly good weed control early. The soybean canopy, if you're looking at soybeans, closed, and those water hemp plants seemed to come up a little bit later when we got some later season rain. So just kind of go around, drive around some of your fields, see where some of those escapes are, whether it's water hemp or things like velvet leaf, mare's tail, some of those different weed species, and make note of that and start thinking about plans for the 2026 season. So next, I wanted to just talk about what we can do right now. I think one of the things that's kind of a challenge is really it's too late for kind of any of the in-season herbicide applications. And that really has been a struggle, as we know that most of the post-emergence herbicides have some cutoff dates. So again, scouting for these weed escapes are pretty important. Not only does that tell you where those escapes are, but it also tells you how effective that herbicide program is, also identifying what new weeds are in that field and potential resistance issues. And as I mentioned, water hemp seems to be one of those ones that are popping up in many fields. Through the MSU Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic, Dr. Erin Hill does a lot of testing or screening of a lot of the different weed species for herbicide resistance. And she generally does a complete thorough screen of many of the different types of resistance issues that we potentially could run into with some of the different species. There are some good steps into collecting the weed seeds that she can actually test to see if there are resistance. Usually she likes to have most of those seeds in by mid-November, and those can be mailed to or brought into the diagnostic clinic. She does ask that you do keep them in kind of paper bags to make sure that they don't get moldy. That's very important. There are on the website, you can find kind of the screening for herbicide resistant weeds. You can also find that in the back of our weed control guide. And additionally, there are some different fact sheets out there on tips how to find where the weed seeds are. Particularly with ragweed species, that can be tough. Another thing that can also be tough is when we look at some of the different pigweed species, whether it's water hemp or Palmer amaranth, because we have both male and female plants. It's really important to make sure that you have the female plants that have seeds. And one thing that you can do is basically just try to rub that seed head on your hand. And if you're seeing black seed, then you have a female plant. Erin has indicated that some of the samples that she has received so far are actually the male plants. So it's important to make sure that you get the correct plants to make sure she can get those testings done. Additionally, we're doing a screening of water hemp samples from basically the sugar beet region. If you have water hemp in your sugar beet fields, please get a hold of your local agriculturalist and have them collect some samples. And we have a grad student that'll be doing some sampling, particularly to get some baseline resistance testing for as we move towards some of the true bearer sugar beets. So in addition to kind of finding out where these issues are and determining whether we have resistance showing up in some of these different species, there are also a couple other things that can be done. If you have some lower populations, it's always good to try to get some of those weeds out of those fields, particularly before they start to shed seed. A lot of times, a lot of the pigweed plants will hold on to their seed for a while, so you can actually remove those, get those out of the field, and hopefully not have a whole lot spread. Another thing you can do is basically harvest around some of those weedy areas, or look at harvesting those weedy fields last. Combines are the perfect spreader for weeds in a field. And in general, usually when we start to see newer weeds come into a field, it's usually about the place where a combine has started in that field. So trying to eliminate transferring a lot of seed from field to field is a very important thing. There are some different techniques that people have looked at to kind of maybe dry down some of those green weeds that might be out there at harvest. We see that a lot of the soybeans are turning pretty fast. Things like lamb's quarter might be a little bit harder to get through a combine, some other things. And there are some harvest aids, and we'll call those pre-harvest herbicides that can be used. We use these quite a bit in dry beans. There are also some that are labeled in soybeans. They aren't really commonly used in soybeans too much. Generally, we can get through those, but there are some different options, and that information can be found in our weed control guide. There are different use rates for the different herbicides that are labeled, as well as there are different pre-harvest intervals. So some of the ones, things like Gramoxone, actually has a 15-day pre-harvest interval. So if you're looking at trying to get out there sooner than that, that's probably not one that you're wanting to use. Other ones like Sharpen have a 3-day pre-harvest interval. So keep those things in mind. We do have a good section in our weed control guide that talks about that. One of the things you want to consider when you're looking at potentially using a harvest aid in sugar beet or in soybeans is, will the herbicide options work on the weeds that are present? So for example, if you're looking at something like water hemp or Palmer amaranth, we know that we have pretty much glyphosate resistance across there. So glyphosate obviously is not going to work as a dry down in some of those weeds, where something like Sharpen might. Another thing that's really important is to look at the stage of the soybeans. Depending on what harvest stage you're looking at, there are some different key things to look for. If you're using something like glyphosate, aim, or clarity, basically you need to make sure that there are no green pods out there. And then when we're looking at Gramoxone and Sharpen, we're looking at about 70% leaf drop and more than 65% of the pods mature, and that seed moisture around less than 30%. So there's a lot of things to consider. We've done a lot of work looking at some of these different harvest aids, including a product called Defol, to basically help long maturity of soybeans, and really haven't seen too much of a benefit up in the northern part of the US, like here in Michigan. So we're still playing around with some of that, but right now, if you're using a harvest aid, you're probably looking at it to control weeds. Another thing to consider is that there are some rotation restrictions associated with some of these different harvest aids. In particular, if you're going to sugar beets or dry beans next year, that's another thing to consider. Here's just some pictures that we took several years ago when Sharpen was used at a 2-ounce rate, and then went to sugar beets the following year. You can see we had some stand reduction from that. And it's really important to make sure that you're following those rotation restrictions, which we have a nice table 12 in the back of the weed guide. And a lot of these might have some caveats, like make sure in your rotation interval not to count the time when the ground is frozen. We've also seen where people have maybe used Sharpen as a desiccation in dry beans and wanting to go to dry beans the next year. And again, with those higher rates, a lot of times we do see some potential issues. Usually with the 1-ounce rate, we don't have that as much of an issue. So one other thing we can do this fall is looking at managing some of our winter annual weeds. and also perennials and biennials. And one of the weeds that tend to be a problem in the fall is some of our fall emerging horseweed or mare's tail. And some of the fields that we might consider for using fall applications are no-till fields, fields that might have reduced tillage or vertical till, where we have infestations of perennial or biennial weeds, and some of our earlier harvested fields, because in the case of removing a lot of the foliage or crop plants that are there, it provides more sunlight, particularly if we have a warm fall like it's looking to be. And if there's any moisture, we'll start to see excessive winter annual growth. So when is the best time to make these fall applications? Really, we want to make these applications when the weeds are still actively growing. Ideally, when the daytime temperatures are around 50 degrees or greater. And usually that range is kind of between 40 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Also know that if we have some earlier frost, there are some weeds that are tolerant to frost and can be effectively controlled after frost. So things like dandelion, applying herbicides in the fall to dandelions is a really good way to reduce those dandelion populations. Also Canada thistle, because basically those herbicides are going towards those root or food reserves of the roots of both of those, or the root stocks. And as far as timing, usually in Michigan, we're usually pretty good through mid-November for some of those fall herbicide applications. There's a couple different strategies that can be used, using things that are non-residual herbicides, so there's no issues with rotation restrictions. In some cases, somebody might want to put a residual in there to see if maybe we can hold off on a spring application, or at least reduce some of that winter annual weed growth that may come up in the spring. And really, there are a lot of different herbicides that are labeled that can be used either prior to corn or soybeans. What this generally does is reduces the variability from spring only treatments. And we will, in some cases, we will still need a burn down, depending on what the weed species is. If we have a weed that emerges throughout the season, including in the fall, like horseweed, sometimes we might need a spring burn down, but it's one of those things to keep in mind. Another thing that we also see is if we remove all the winter annual weeds in the fall, a lot of times what we see is some of our early emerging summer annual weeds that'll need to be burned down, like lamb's quarters, or some of the things like giant ragweed. Some of our effective fall herbicide options are things like 2,4-D, Sharpen, and dicamba. Many of these, usually we apply glyphosate because it does help improve control of other winter annual weeds and perennials, such as dandelion. With the 2,4-D, Sharpen, and dicamba, they are all very effective on our glyphosate-resistant horseweed or mare's tail. Just want to mention a couple things about winter wheat as we move into planting winter wheat. A lot of times we will have some fields that after we harvest soybeans, we will see some winter annual weeds there. So it's important to make sure that we control those weeds. And we've done a lot of work, and this is looking at just a 1 ounce of Sharpen plus glyphosate, methylated seed oil, and AMS. And that has really helped with those fall burn downs to control things like mare's tail. We have some of these different options. Obviously, glyphosate alone, our key miss would be the glyphosate resistant horseweed, but it would be good on many of our perennials, biennials, and so forth. Also, Sharpen plus glyphosate, as I mentioned, would be an effective horseweed control. So again, you can use 1 or 2 ounces prior to planting wheat. And again, these would all have to be applied prior to the wheat emerging. And then also gramoxone is another option. I'm going to go ahead and skip past here. I know we're getting a little bit short on time. The other thing we can do is there are some post-emergence herbicides that can be applied in the fall to wheat. Generally, these will be applied when wheat is at the 2 to 3 leaf stage, and we've done a lot of testing with some funding by the Michigan Wheat Program. And what those post-emergence herbicide options are really good for is controlling winter annual weeds that emerge with the wheat crop. One potential is in some cases, depending on how thick the wheat stand is, if we have a good actively growing wheat stand, a lot of times we won't need a spring application, but in some cases, if we have a a stand where there's a lot of light that gets through, we might need another herbicide because a lot of these herbicides don't have enough residual to go through the fall. As far as horseweed control, we're looking at things like Husky, Talinar, and Culex that would be very good in the fall. And with the winter annual grasses that we're seeing more of a problem with, we do have some good options for fall applications, particularly for windgrass, annual bluegrass, and rough stalk bluegrass. And just a couple pictures here. On your left-hand side of the screen, you can see a fall application of Osprey versus a spring application of Osprey for windgrass control. And you can see there's quite a big difference in the control with much better control with fall applications. We can also see with early planted wheat, where we have a lot of winter annual weed growth. Those are going to be extremely helpful. You can see this is in the spring and April. The untreated on the left, Husky and Osprey with an earlier planting date, and then you can see our later planting date. In some cases, where we really see the benefit is from those spring or those the fall applications with our early planted wheat. I'm gonna go ahead and get past here. I know we're running a little short on time. As far as other benefits for our fall post herbicide applications, it does allow us an opportunity to get some frost-seeded clover out in the spring. There are very few herbicides that we can apply in the spring that allow for frost-seeded clover. As you can see here, fall application of Husky versus spring, we have quite a bit more clover that is able to come up. We might see a little bit of bleaching, but in the end, we have good growth and good biomass. And we do have these recommendations in the fall are in our weed guide of which herbicides can be used in the fall and then be able to frost seed red clover. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we have our weed guide as our recommendations are there. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Steve, and then I will be around for any questions that somebody might have.
We'll go ahead and move into our question and answer.
So, Steve, I was looking at them. It looks like there's a couple of weed control questions.
Yeah, go for it.
The first one is how to kill the proliferation of horse nettles. So, horse nettles is definitely a tougher weed to control. If you happen to have the opportunity after harvest to be able to get horse nettle, my suggestion would be to use definitely a higher rate of glyphosate. That would need to be on before any frost. As I mentioned, some weeds, some perennials will tolerate frost like dandelion, Canada thistle, horse nettles does not. So what we would need to do is have an application after or prior to frost, and probably the higher rate of glyphosate. And it's going to be more than one application over time. So it's just, unfortunately, it's a really tough weed to get. The next one that I saw was, let's see, any way to get Canada thistle out, a cover crop of radish and oats. Unfortunately, we do not have any selective herbicides that will not kill the radish or the oats. So if you had one or the other, well, particularly if you had just oats, we might have some options, but those options would also take out the radish. So from a standpoint of making sure that both of those survive, we just don't have any options out there for that particular weed. And I think that was all I saw from a weed control standpoint.
Yeah. I see another question, or rather a statement from Eric Anderson, just about some soybean conditions. If you don't know, Eric is our soybean educator, taking over for Mike Staten as of recent. Eric, do you want to make any more comments about that, or if you're able to? If not, you can check that note there in the chat about
Nope, that was
early soybean harvest. Okay, perfect. Thanks for that note. And I also know Marty had some notes about red crown rot in soybeans that he shared an article there in the chat. I know that he was sort of on the road at this time.
Yeah, Steve, good morning.
Awesome.
So it's just a note. So red crown rot has been confirmed in Wisconsin and Ohio this season, just in one county each, and it's in northern Indiana, northern Illinois. So I suspect it's probably here in Michigan. In those fields where it has picked up in Indiana and Illinois, it's done a lot of damage. And so we just want to make people aware, just to keep an eye out for anything unusual, anything like STS, you're not sure, just grab a sample and we can test it at a later date. Just put that plant, roots and all, into a paper bag, let it dry if you can't get it into us straight away. And then we can check it out later on for you. But just a note on that. And the other note was, as we get into wheat planting, we've had quite a bit of smut and bunt issues around the state in certain areas over the years as well. So just be mindful as we're maybe thinking about trying to cut costs. It's a good idea to use certified seed if possible, and then also a seed treatment that's got good coverage of that seed if there is any smut or bunt on there to help reduce that likelihood of carryover into the seedlings. So I think that's all I had. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Marty. Just curious on that. Do we have any treatments for red crown rot in soybeans as of yet, or any recommendations? I know it hasn't been widely prevalent in Michigan fields, like you said, but just so producers can prepare maybe for the inevitable in the future. Any sort of like first line controls right now for this particular disease? I don't know if Marty's able to answer, but good information in his article. I've shared that article before, so if you want to learn a little bit more about red crown rot in soybeans, a new emerging threat in Michigan soybean production, that would be an excellent article to take a read. I see a couple salutations. Thank you, George. Thank you, Melville. Appreciate it. Any other questions or specialists that would like to update everyone? James has given thanks to you, Jeff. Appreciates the weekly ag weather updates. Would like to get possibly a new EnviroWeather station in the western third of the UP. Yeah, is that big black hole at the present?
And I think we please follow up with that. I'd like to talk more about that. That's something we would like as well. So you can use email. But agree. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent suggestion, James. We appreciate that. We said we're always trying to improve a little bit. Let me try to drop Jeff's information here in the chat on that, and please reach out and we'll see what we can do here. Clay, many thanks to the presentations. Thank you, Clay. I know you're a mainstay here. You're here almost every week. Thanks for being here and a part of the series. All right. Well, we'll do a final call here. Any other updates from specialists, educators, MSU personnel? Any other questions? We'll do a last call. Maybe we'll end a little bit early today. Must be harvest season. Everybody's itching to get out there in the fields. I don't blame you one bit. Awesome. Well, thank you all again for attending the virtual breakfast series here in 2025. We hope to see you next year. Again, be on the lookout for those evaluations. Have a safe and happy harvest season, and please reach out to myself and any one of the MSU field crop personnel if you run into any issues in your fields, see anything weird going on. We'd be happy to come out and work with you and see what's going on. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the year.